And late yesterday on the Drive Show, the news came through that there had been an agreement of sorts between the ACT Labor Party and the ACT Greens on an approach to problem gambling here in the ACT, a shared idea to reduce the number of gaming machines, to reduce access to gaming machines for certain hours of the day. We will be talking to Shane Rattenbury later on in the program just to find out whether he's happy with this outcome, because it's certainly nothing like he was asking for. But Craig Shannon is the CEO of Clubs ACT, and he joins us on the Drive Show. Craig Shannon, good to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me back, Ross.
You are welcome anytime. Craig Shannon, just a matter of formula here. Were you involved? Did you know this was coming, this announcement yesterday afternoon? Had you been involved in the discussions at all?
Yes, we've been pretty intensely involved behind the scenes with all three parties in regards to the debate going on before the Assembly wrapped up. And so the only thing that was a bit new this week for us was the trading hours matter, which hadn't been really floated before in any real sense. So that was a bit out of left field to some extent.
Yes. Well, that sort of is a fairly key plank of their approach. What do you think of it? I mean, can clubs work with that? Just so we're letting people know that between 2 a.m. and 10 a.m. each day, that the gaming machines would not be allowed to be used. Are you comfortable with that? Can the clubs live with that?
Well, it's got to go through a regulatory impact assessment first, which will require consultation. And obviously it's a bit fresh to our members' knowledge, so we will be consulting with them pretty intensely over it. But I think of all the things that could have happened before this week wrapped up in the name of campaigning and posturing, it's probably the least worst outcome that we could have anticipated. And I think there'll be a process where, in the first instinct, it would probably affect some venues' capacity to stay open between 2 and 4 o'clock, where they might currently be doing so. But that's something that we'll be consulting with the members about.
It's been a long time, Craig Shannon, since I've been out after midnight, so I don't know how many people are out and about. But do the clubs get a lot of action? Do the poker machines get a lot of action between 2 a.m. and 10 a.m.?
Oh, in some cases they do, and certain clubs do. I think we've got to be mindful of the fact that we have moved to a 24-hour work culture increasingly, and our instinctive concern about anything about trading hours or otherwise is that shift workers should have a right to some kind of entertainment and lifestyle and not be reconciled to having to stay home after their shifts if they actually need to get out and have a bit of a social existence. So that there is a bit of an impact there, and there are an increasing number of shift workers we should appreciate. But I think of all the things that could have been put on the table, this is probably not as dramatically bad as some of the things that were being contemplated.
No, we'll turn to that in just a moment. But it's a good point you make there, because I did hear one person today saying, well, anybody that's sitting at a poker machine after 2 a.m. in the morning is obviously a problem gambler. But it's a good point you make. People whose shifts finish at midnight, and there are a lot of people listening right now, they're just chuffing off to work. And so maybe those are the people who are going to feel a little bit left out by this.
Absolutely, and I think people have got to keep in mind when they make those sort of false accusations that a lot of the club venues are the only place after midnight that a lot of shift workers can get meals and beverages. And I grew up in this town. I remember what a wasteland it was after 10 o'clock at night trying to find a meal in Canberra. And so I think, we shouldn't be short-sighted about the impact of these sort of things on shift workers.
But they're not stopping, Craig Shannon. They're not saying you've got to close the club down. You just need to put a rope up to stop people going to the pokies after 2.
Oh, yeah, but I think it's one of the reality checks we've got here is that poker machine revenue does provide the funding that allows these venues to stay open in a lot of cases.
So do you think, and I know it's only early days, do you think this, you sort of mentioned it in your introduction, that this law, the 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. law, might actually end up with a lot of clubs closing their doors for those hours?
I think there'll be certainly some that would probably make that decision to do so if they barely had enough patronage to sustain themselves if they couldn't have poker machine operators in there as well. So, I don't really know what the impact directly will be, but I think instinctively there might be a couple of venues that say there's probably not much value in them remaining open if they've got a reduction in the number of patrons who'll be attending the venue. 5:23, you're listening to ABC Canberra Drive with me, Ross Solly. We're chatting with Craig Shannon, the CEO of Clubs ACT. What about the reduction in the number of gaming machines to 3,500? That's not going to send any club to the wall, is it? No, well, the reduction to 3,500 was anticipated anyway.
Yep.
Our main concern is compulsory acquisition, where clubs might be forced to hand over machines for a rate and licenses, for a rate that is not a competitive market price. We've got estimates from our own advisors, RSM, that those machine licences are worth over $200,000. And the government's only offering $15,000 or $20,000 per licence. So there are real issues there. But we certainly have no problem with a voluntary surrender model. But there is a bit of an issue with credits that the clubs are getting, not being able to easily expend them in regards to developments or otherwise, as far as diversification goes. But yes, the 3,500 is a livable figure.
There's going to be an independent inquiry that was agreed upon by the Greens and the Labor Party. Would you like a seat at that table? Would you expect a seat at that table? Although I suppose by putting someone from Clubs ACT on there, it no longer becomes an independent inquiry.
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, we wouldn't want ourselves or even the gambling harm community to be represented on that inquiry. We want it to be independent. We actually proposed it, Ross. So this wasn't a left field issue at all. We actually proposed to all three parties and thankfully got that support.
So who would be the best people to do an inquiry? I mean, would it need to be somebody who has had some experience in the area? I mean, who do we think would do an adequate job, a truly independent inquiry?
I think we've got to keep sight of the fact that this proposal is for a club industry inquiry that includes gambling, not a gambling industry inquiry that includes clubs. So we actually want the economic issues and the issues of what financial support base the club industry provides to community sports and social organisations in this town, and the cross-border issues in terms of regulation, because we don't want to create an environment here where people are just going to jump over to Queanbeyan or into New South Wales to expend their revenue when they could be better protected through a harm minimisation framework in the ACT. But we want people who have some gravitas, obviously, so that all three parties can develop policy in a bipartisan and less political approach. And we'd like some people with a bit of experience in economic terms particularly, and what impact particularly the sports sector would have in this town if there was any major hit to revenue of clubs.
Yeah, there's an old saying, I think I'm going to butcher it here, but it's something like never ask a question unless you already know the answer, or never set up an inquiry unless you already know what the findings are going to be. Are you pretty confident, Craig Shannon, given that you've said that you actually asked for this, you want this to happen, that it will come down pretty favourably for you and the clubs?
Oh, we're very confident that the role our clubs play in social cohesion terms in this town is fundamental. There is no doubt that the community sports sector in this town could not basically operate without the support being provided in one form or another by the club industry. And that applies across the board to social and cultural and other organisations. We haven't got the quantification on that, but neither does the government or any other parties. And we want those facts on the table so that collectively we can all come up with best practice policies that don't impact on the social cohesion objectives of this community.
But to be fair, Craig Shannon, you can't have that inquiry, can you, without also looking at harm that is being done to sections of the community and people who do struggle and families who have been torn apart by problem gambling. You can't have an inquiry without looking in depth at that as well, can you?
No, absolutely. In fact, we've put draft terms of reference to all three parties that actually included that within the terms of reference. Because our view is that the club industry plays a fundamental role in intervention with problem gamblers and providing them pathways to support. It's the only form of gambling where you actually get someone who will come over to you and see if you're okay and provide you pathways of intervention if you have a problem. Online gambling and otherwise does not.
But is that true? I mean, isn't this part of the problem here, that we've heard stories and there's an investigation ongoing at the moment, in fact, that somebody who had a problem was actually being encouraged to continue gambling?
You do well. Those facts haven't been ascertained. As you know, that's quite a tawdry 4-year exercise.
I know it's just dragging on forever. Yeah.
So we don't actually know what the facts are there. But look, there's no doubt that there are the individual cases that crop up from time to time with this. But in general terms, our clubs have a very high record for their support and intervention for problem gamblers, and working in with Relationships Australia and the Gambling and Racing Commission to make sure that we've got a system here that provides a framework of support. But if you hop on your phone and start online wagering or otherwise, then you're not going to get that kind of support intervention. And that's why we don't want to actually throw the baby out with the bathwater here.
On the text line, somebody says, Ross, where are all these shift workers in Canberra needing a meal and a drink and a punt at 3 a.m? We have no industries, no mines, no manufacturing. Is this a serious argument, they ask?
Well, I think that's an unserious question, quite frankly, and I assume that person obviously goes to bed at 10 o'clock at night. My son, there are tradespeople and others, public servants and others, who work all through the night in this town. I grew up here. I worked in the public sector. There are any number of people in this town that are working after midnight in Canberra. I think that's a very limited and narrow perspective that individuals got.
All right, on the other side of the coin, though, somebody says, people will gamble. I prefer if the money goes locally instead of going into an app where the money could go overseas, says this listener. And Mike has said on the text line, clubs have an addiction to pokies just as punters do. We need to recognise this when hearing their openness to harm reduction ideas. I'll let you have a final comment on that, Craig Shannon, before I let you go.
We regularly have promoted things like facial recognition technology and better self-exclusion programs with the ACT government. We're very active in that harm minimisation space. We are not-for-profit clubs, Ross. We have no incentive to damage or harm our patrons in any way, and that's why we're very genuine about our interest in this area. So people who make those assertions about clubs being addicted to poker machines, they're obviously just zealots, and they have no reality check involved in what they're saying.
Craig Shannon, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for your time this afternoon.
Thank you. You have a good day.
Okay, it's Craig Shannon, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Clubs ACT. It's